Ah, here we are again. I've managed to move the game on a fair amount since the last video, so I thought I'd do a quick catch up. We're at December 1915, so played about a year from where the last instalment left off. A basic update on the game is that Western Front has stabilised pretty much in the same position we were at when the last video finished, which I suppose follows pretty historical lines. The Eastern Front has become more active. The Germans used the interior lines power they have to shift the siege guns across to the Eastern Front. Sort of late summer 1915, and they're now making some progress against the Russians. The French and the British spent a lot of 1915 trying to persuade the Italians to enter the war, and eventually, I think it was about November 1915, they finally decided to join the Entente powers. So they've just set up, and it's been interesting in the Balkans as well. The more eagle-eyed of you who maybe watched the first instalment and who have played the game may have realised from looking at the map that that there were no Turkish forces deployed on the map, which was a mistake, because Turkey actually activates a month after the Japanese, who activate a month after Britain joins the war, so they should have been in place. So I was only, I think, 4 months in, so I was able to trace back my steps and correct that mistake, and consequently Kemal, who's the Ottoman leader, the other one doesn't appear if you're not using the Ottoman map. So Kemal arrived with a pretty hefty Turkish army and Ottoman army, drove towards the eastern border of Serbia and promptly had a disastrous initial attack against the Serbs, who were entrenched in the mountains, such that the Ottomans gained 1 point of demoralisation, but Kemal managed to hold his position in the game. When you become demoralised, if there's a leader involved in the particular battle, either on the attack or defence, the side that becomes demoralised, there's a chance that that general will basically be pensioned off. But Kemal managed to survive, and he's since returned, and that convinced the British to send a hefty contingent down via Salonika, which there's a concept of active neutrals in the game, which allows the Entente powers to basically transit forces through neutral Greece in support of the Serbs, and that's what the British have done. And they then had an equally disastrous counter-attack against the Ottoman forces. So that's been a bit of a comedy of errors, but quite amusing to see unfold. TI, I mentioned TI last time. I probably didn't state exactly what I was, how I was determining TI, but essentially, if there is a major battle with an entrenched defender, I roll two additional dice, and if I get less than an 8, that is 1 point of TI added to the total. For a minor, it's less than 6. And the current TI position is that the Entente powers are at 14 and the Central powers at 13. So pretty close. I suspect that there may be a few more added to the Central powers as they push more into Russia. Maybe the Austro-Hungarians join in a little bit. But having said that, 1916 is a pretty good year for the Western powers on the Western Front, because the Entente starts to get the advantage in the aircraft. At the moment, there is an Eindecker aircraft on the German side which has been able to see off most of the Entente aircraft. But having said that, the French have made some inroads around Nancy to try and take that back. So it's quite interesting. Plays pretty quickly once you omit the third map and do the abstracted naval rules and remove Africa. The game does tick along quite quickly. Breaches. This is the one thing I wanted to cover really in this quick video. Is I like what the breaches represent, but never convinced regarding how they're actually implemented in the game, because what it represents is a partial success. So on a 9 through 12 on the attack table, if you get a net 9 through 12, you get a gain ground result. I think 12 is a breakthrough, which is slightly different, but if you do succeed in getting a gain ground result, you get a level 1 breach, which sounds good. You're making progress. You get another one, you get a level 2 breach, and if you get a third one, you then get a full breakthrough, which will remove any remaining defenders, even after those that are being removed from the direct result. So if you get a 1-2 gain ground result, and that gain ground result gives you a breakthrough, you would remove the 2 defenders from the 1-2, and also any other troops that were there, you'd also get those killed as well, which allows you to have a full breakthrough. So on the face of it, a gain ground result sounds really good, and it's what you're striving to achieve. However, you're so heavily penalised when you get one, in that if you attack out of a level 1 breach, you suffer a -1, and if you attack out of a level 2 breach, you get a -2. And given it's a 2d6 system, and the defender is already getting the benefits of being entrenched of -2 typically, say for the French, to attack out of a level 2 breach, you're now looking at a -4. Now you can offset some of that by using infrastructure to prepare your attack. Maybe you've got some siege guns, possibly you've got air superiority, if you've been able to get air superiority on the hex, but then the defender may be able to send in some reserves potentially for an additional -1. So you're still looking at a -2 or 3. Bear in mind that you get the attacker demoralised on a 3 or less, so it's a risk. But more than that, if you attack a breach, then you get a benefit, and the sort of rationale is that the original attacker who's gained the ground is more exposed. He's gone out on a thin salient, he's breaking through, and he's exposed his flanks on both sides. And the direct modifier for attacking a breach is the breach value times 2. So to put that into context, if ever you got to a breach 2 level and you were attacked, then the attacker would get a +4, partially offset by your entrenched status, so maybe a +2. But then equally, if you've got any infrastructure or siege guns, you could be looking at +3 or possibly better. Now, consider that you get a defender demoralised result on a net 10. You're looking at a 7 or an 8 to get a very successful attack, or a successful counter-attack against a breach. And to me, that's too much. It has the effect. I played a game with a gentleman via Vassal and we did the full campaign, and your reaction, having managed to secure a gain ground result, the first thing you did on your next turn was to remove the breach, because you know that going from breach 1 to breach 2 you end up being so exposed. It's not something you want to maintain, because you're exposing yourself to becoming demoralised with the counter-attack. So given that your first instinct, having got the breach, is to take it off the map at the next opportunity, it just doesn't seem to make much sense. I like what it's trying to do, I just think that the basic the sort of penalties are just too severe. So during this game I've been applying a modified rule that any attack out of a breach, no matter what level, is a -1, and any attack into a breach, no matter what level, is a +1. So it still tries to represent the exposed nature of the salient coming through the breach, but it's somewhat watered down, and consequently there are now breach markers on the map which have been gained at expense of troops and attacks and spending infrastructure markers, and the person who has gained the breach wants to keep them, because they've been hard fought, and you want to maintain them on the map to hopefully eventually get that full breakthrough. So that seems to work a bit better to my mind. I'm sure everyone will have a view on that. It's one of the things I liked about the system, was it was very different from the traditional, attack a hex from 2 or 3 hexes, get a combat odds, chuck on a CRT, and get an exchange or a DR or something. So that the whole combat dynamic is very interesting. But for me, some of it just didn't quite work. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to have a quick look around the map and show you where we are. Okay, so Western Front, December 1915. You can see the attack into Maubeuge is still trying. They've now managed to get a double breach, which, with the rules as now being played, they are motivated to keep, because they've spent a lot of time and effort trying to get that breach, and if they get one more, they'll get the breakthrough which they're after. And so the French may have to consider launching some counterattacks to try and get it downgraded to maybe level 1 breach and then get it removed. The French themselves have a level 1 breach against Nancy, which they're maintaining, and you can see the French aircraft there, which has been giving air superiority. The Eindecker German aircraft, which has had the better of the British aircraft, which has retreated back to London. But in 1916, the next generation of Entente aircraft arrive, which will swing the air battle back in favour of the Entente powers on the Western Front. And in Russia, you can see there's been some progress towards Moscow. The fort at Novgorod has fallen. The Austro-Hungarian-Russian line here has probably not moved at all. There's been plenty of fighting, but no movement. And that's the Serbian front. Again, very similar to the old position, but now you'll see in the Balkans, you'll see the Turkish forces that have come up from Constantinople, driving into the eastern border of Serbia, where they have been stopped, and the British Expeditionary Force coming up from Salonika to support the Serbs, to try and keep them in the war. And at long last, the Italians have been persuaded to join the Entente, and they've just mobilised their troops, and the Austro-Hungarians have garrisoned the forts along the Italian border. So that's where we are. See you next time.